Hey, what's going on everyone? Welcome to the video, and today I'll be showing you how you can add authorization and authentication to your JavaScript and NodeJS applications. We will be doing this using Auth0, and the application that we'll be building is a single page application. So first of all, what is Auth0? Auth0 is a cloud-based platform that provides authorization and authentication services for securing applications and your API. So let's look at the difference between what Auth0 is and what OAuth is. So we've just said that Auth0 is the platform that provides you with authorization and authentication services, and now OAuth is a standard that allows users to grant third-party applications limited access to their data on another service without sharing the login credentials. So on a lot of applications or websites, you can log in using either Google or Facebook or any other social media platform, for example like GitHub as well. Then you can log in using Google, but Google does not share the login credentials with that application. So this is what is important to understand. Next, going on to a single page application. So this is what we will be building in this demo today. So a single page application is a web application or website that interacts with the user by dynamically rewriting the current page rather than pulling different pages from the server each time. And then there's two ways that you can implement Auth0 into a single page application. So first is installing Auth0 as a dependency using either npm or yarn. And then the second is referencing the CDN in your HTML using a script tag. Alright everyone, so what we're going to do is we're going to go on to auth0.com and we're going to log in. Once you've successfully logged into Auth0, we're going to go on to applications and then applications over here. Then we're going to go to create new application. We just give the application a name, so we can make it my Auth Node app, and we're going to go over to single page apps, choose the JavaScript one and say continue. Then you'll see that the app has been created and you now have a client ID. Alright everyone, so here in VS Code I'll show you the application that we already have at the moment. So first, going on to the index.html, just a simple HTML page with one h1 tag with the heading, a paragraph tag, and then two buttons that we'll be using, one for the login and one for the logout. Both of them are currently disabled. We just have an on-click event handler and then just giving each of them an ID. And then, as mentioned before, I did show you the two ways that you can implement Auth0 into your Node.js application. So I did say we are going to make use of the CDN tag. So here we are referencing the Auth0 CDN. So that's over here. And then here's just another script tag where we're referencing the app.js file, which is in the public directory. So going over to our auth config, so this is what we're going to be loading in our Auth0 application details, so our domain and our client ID. We'll do that in just a moment. So going over to our server.js, here is our Node.js server. So quick explanation of this is that this line serves all of the static content inside of the public directory. So all of your static files will be in that directory. So this would be the CSS and the JavaScript. So we have a style.css over here and an app.js as previously mentioned. And then this would serve your Auth0 config file, this line. And then lastly, this line would serve your index.html file. And then lastly, this is just telling localhost to serve it on port 3000. So just to show you what we have at the moment, so if we run npm start, then it says we are running out the application on port 3000. And then if we go on to localhost 3000, here's just what we have at the moment. So let's actually start implementing Auth0 into this application. Let's go back to our auth-config.json. On Auth0 in our application, go to settings. And then here you'll see the domain and the client ID. So copy these two. So copy the domain and then paste it over here. Go back to the client ID, copy the client ID and paste it over here. Now going further into our app.js file, we are first going to start by creating this Auth0 client variable. Next up, this line fetches the details from our auth-config.json and it stores it in this fetch auth-config variable. Next up, we create this configure client function that uses the fetch auth-config function that we just created over here. It takes that response and then it creates a config out of that. And then what it does is it initializes the Auth0 client with the details that we got from the fetch auth config. This call will also populate the in-memory cache with a valid access token and user profile if that user was logged in and that session is still valid. Next up, we're going to do this onload function. So here we are adding a handler to the onload method of the window to initialize the application. Alright, so I added this update UI function. So you want to control what the user is seeing. You want the user to be able to see the public page, but not the private pages that the user shouldn't see when not logged in. So for example, the settings page or the profile page. So you can check if the user is authenticated by checking this is authenticated function. So we assign it to this is authenticated variable, and then we can control the login and logout buttons using this variable. And what we do is we can just add this update UI function to the onload window handler. And now when the window loads, depending on whether the user is authenticated, the login and logout buttons will display accordingly. Alright, now it's been a while since we've run the program, so let's do that quickly and see where we are. Let's just cancel it and then run it again. Go to localhost 3000, then refresh. Alright, so you would see that the login button is now enabled because nobody has previously logged in. But if we click login now, it doesn't do anything because that functionality hasn't been added yet. Alright, now moving on to the login function that we'll use to log into the application. So in this instance, authentication is achieved through a redirect to the Auth0 universal login page. Once the user signs in or logs in, the result will be passed to your app's redirect URI, which is provided with the authentication request. So still inside of app.js, I have added this login function that calls Auth0 client.login with redirect to perform the login step. The login function is called by the login button previously defined in the HTML page. So here we defined login and logout. So in this example, we are redirecting the user back to the same page that we're on right now. We're not going to redirect to another page because this is a single page application. And we do this by specifying window.location.origin. Now additionally, because this is a single page application, the results of the call need to be handled in the same context. So this means that when the page is loaded and the user is authenticated, you could be in one of the following two scenarios. So scenario one is either the user does not want to authenticate and is just navigating through the public content, or the user has recently initiated the authentication process and is now looking to just complete the authentication process. So we'll be focusing on this second scenario as this is the one that we need to handle. So in the window.onload method, we check whether the user is authenticated or not, and if the URL query contains both code and state parameter. So in the window.onload method, we check whether the user is authenticated in this line, and if the URL query contains both a code and state parameter. So this will indicate that an authentication result is present and needs to be parsed. So in this scenario, you would be calling the Auth0 client handle redirect callback function. This will attempt to exchange the result that the Auth0 backend gave you back for real tokens you can use. In addition, the query parameters must be removed from the URL so that if the user refreshes the page, the app does not try to parse the state and code parameters again. In addition, this is to show the gated content if the user is authenticated. After we've checked for the code and state parameters, we use this line to process the login request. And then in this line, we use the replace state function to redirect the user away and replace the query string parameter. Alright, now that we've implemented the login functionality, let's run the program again by running npm start. Alright, now that we are at localhost 3000 and you can now see that the login button is active, we can go ahead and try to log in. And you will see an error like this, and it is because we have not specified our callback URL in our Auth0 application yet. So let's just go back one and then copy this localhost from the URL. Then in our Auth0 application, go to settings and then scroll all the way down to allowed callback URLs. Then paste that, make sure that the HTTP and the / is included. Then say save changes. Then just give it a few seconds while we go back to our localhost 3000. Then let's just refresh to make sure and then try again, log in. And then here you'll see you'll be redirected to the universal Auth login page. So I'm just going to quickly follow the steps and log in. Alright, I've now completed the login process using the Google Auth method. And now, as you can see, the login button is grayed out and the logout button is active, indicating that we have successfully logged in. Alright, so next up is implementing the logout method. So here we start the logout method by calling the logout function on the Auth0 client, passing in a valid return to URI. So in the sample, you will return to the user back to the same page that they are now, just like the login function. And just like the login function, you can obtain that value from window.location.origin. And then we just abstract this functionality into a logout function that we call in our index.html again. Alright, so let's test the logout functionality by running the program again. Okay, I have already logged in a second time. And now when we click logout, we get the same callback error. So this is another misconfiguration. So let's go back to the application details. And then here in allowed logout URLs, just paste localhost 3000 again, and then save changes. And then let's go back to localhost. Let's go back here, just press the back button. Then we can try to log out again. And then here you can see the login button has successfully been activated again, and the logout button is again disabled, indicating that we have successfully logged out. Alright, so next up we are going to add some gated content that you'll only be able to see once you have been logged in. So that will be your user details. So let's quickly add that. So here I've created a div with class hidden and ID gated content. So here's just an indication that so you're seeing this because you're currently logged in, and we are going to be displaying your access token as well as your user profile. So to do this, we are going to modify app.js again. So go back to app.js, and then in the update UI function, we are going to add some functionality to update the UI once the user is logged in. Alright, so I've added this if-else statement. So here it checks if the user is logged in. Then it removes the hidden attribute from the gated content element. And then it also displays the access token by calling the get token silently function from the Auth0 client, as well as it displays also the user profile by calling the get user function from the Auth0 client. If the user is not logged in, we add the hidden class to the gated content element. Now let's run the program and then just test this again. Alright, I have logged in now, and you can now successfully see my access token that we'll be using to make API calls, as well as the user profile with your information on it. Let's go ahead and log out. And here you can see we're not seeing any of this information anymore. Alright, so now we are going to be creating a backend API. So in this section, we are going to be modifying the Express.js application that we built to support a new endpoint. And then this endpoint will require a valid access token to be sent through an authorization header for the call to be successful. So first of all, we are back here in Auth0 and we are going to create an API. So go to Applications and choose APIs. Say Create API. Alright, so I've filled in the details here for creating an API. I've just given the API a name of my Auth node API, and the identifier is localhost 3000. The JSON web token is Auth0, and then the sign-in algorithm is RS256. So we're going to go ahead and say create. And now our API is successfully created. So now we are going to move on to adding the middleware to our backend. So to begin, let's install an npm package that will be used to validate the incoming tokens to the server. So on the terminal, run the following command: npm install express OAuth2 JWT bearer. Hit enter. Next up, we are going to be working in server.js, and we are going to be bringing in the following libraries as imports. So we brought in the auth library, and then we also brought in the auth.config.json in this variable so that the script can get access to the authentication credentials that have been configured. Next up, we are going to be creating the JWT middleware. So here we added a call to this auth function, which creates the middleware needed in order to validate and parse incoming access tokens. So this should go after the require statements over here, but also before any routes have been defined in your application. So these ones. Next up, we are required to make some changes to auth.config.json. So here, just add another comma and then add audience. So we're going to be adding the application identifier of the API that we just created. So you're back in Auth0, this is the identifier, and it is the same as the audience. So basically the audience is the identifier of your API. So it's whatever is going to be using your access token. That is the audience. So go back here to your auth.config.json and replace this with your API identifier. Next up, we are going to be going back to server.js and adding a protected endpoint. So here I've added API/external with the check JWT middleware, and this just sends a response: your access token has been successfully validated. So note that check JWT is used as the second argument here, and this causes check JWT to be executed before the main route handler. And this will reject the call and return a 4.1 response if there is no access token present in the authorization header, or there is an access token but the access token is invalid. And now finally, I've just added some error handling so that a JSON response is returned from your API in the event that a token is missing or a token is invalid. We will get a response back from the API. Alright, next up is calling the API, so we can now turn our attention back to the front-end application, where we will update the application to provide a button to call a function, which in turn will call the API that we just created in the previous section. So here I have index.html open again, and I'm going to add a new button. So here I have added a button with the ID of btn call API. At the moment it is disabled. And then the onClick is a function call API. And then I've also added a pre-element with the ID of API call result. And this is to show the results of the API call in the browser. So next up, open app.js again. We are going to make some changes to the configure client function. So here I have just made some changes to specify the audience value that was added earlier in the auth.config.json. Next up, we are going to add a function called call API to app.js. So in this function, it has a try and catch block. So with this line, we get the access token from the Auth0 client. Then we make a call to the API, setting the token in the authorization header. Then in this line, we fetch the JSON results, and then we display the results in the output element. And then obviously the catch block is for any errors during the API call. And then finally, we are just going to add a line to the update UI function so that the button for calling the API is enabled when the user logs in. So I've added this line, and now we can run the project for a final time. So going to do npm start again. Alright, I have completed the login process again, and now I can call the API by clicking on this button. And then we get the successful message from our API saying that the access token was successfully validated. That is all for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.